They smiled when they said it, which should have warned me. My mother slid the folder across the dining table with both hands, careful and deliberate, like she was offering something fragile. My father leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, already relaxed, already done with whatever this conversation was supposed to be. "It's just a formality," my mother said. "Nothing changes." The word formality hung in the air, light and harmless, like it was meant to calm me. Like it erased the thickness of the documents now sitting inches from my hands. I didn't touch them right away. "What kind of formality?" I asked. My father waved a hand without looking at me. "Administrative. The accountant needs it cleaned up before the end of the quarter." That explanation sounded practiced. Too smooth. Like it had been used before. I opened the folder. Legal language filled the pages. Dense paragraphs. Account numbers partially redacted. Words like authorization, transfer, execution. The kind of paperwork that doesn't exist unless something is moving from one place to another. "This looks like more than paperwork," I said carefully. My mother smiled again, softer this time. "You always read too much into things." She had said that my whole life. When I was a kid and asked why certain decisions were made without me. When I questioned family rules that never seemed to apply evenly. Reading too much into things was how my curiosity was framed as inconvenience. I kept reading. One clause caught my attention. Something about irrevocable authorization upon signature. Another about immediate effect. That didn't sound ceremonial. That sounded final. "What exactly does this authorize?" I asked. My parents exchanged a glance. Quick. Quiet. Then my father answered. "It allows us to manage things more efficiently," he said. "You don't need to worry about the details." I looked up at him. "Why does my signature matter then?" My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Warm. Familiar. Anchoring. "Because it's your account too," she said gently. "And we're just simplifying. You trust us, don't you?" There it was. That question had always been the end of discussions in our house. Trust was never presented as mutual. It was something expected of me, not something explained to me. I hesitated. Not because I thought they were stealing from me. That idea felt too dramatic, too extreme. They were my parents. They'd always framed control as protection, decisions as responsibility. But something in my chest tightened anyway. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. My father sighed, like I was making things difficult. "That's not relevant." That was the moment I should have stopped. Instead, I picked up the pen. I told myself I was being paranoid. That families didn't do things like that. That if there was a problem, it would have been explained. When I signed, my mother squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," she said. My father smiled, relieved now, fully at ease. We talked about dinner plans afterward. Normal things. As if nothing permanent had just happened. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the scene over and over. The rushed explanations. The avoided numbers. The way formality had been used like a blanket to smother questions. I tried to sleep. But a thought kept repeating, quiet and persistent. Formalities don't need reassurance. And reassurance doesn't come this urgently unless something irreversible has already been decided. I didn't know what had moved yet. Only that something had. And that whatever it was, it had required my name. The notification arrived 3 days later, and I almost ignored it. My phone buzzed in the middle of a meeting, screen lighting up briefly before I slid it face down on the table. I assumed it was another routine alert, an automatic update, a low balance reminder, something unimportant. It wasn't until my break that I checked. Transfer completed. $330,000. For a second, I thought I was misreading it. Numbers can do that sometimes, blur together when your brain isn't ready to accept them. I refreshed the screen. Logged out. Logged back in. The number didn't change. $330,000 had moved out of the account I'd shared with my parents since my early 20s. An account they'd encouraged me to keep, for simplicity. An account they said made taxes easier. An account I hadn't questioned because it had always been framed as temporary. My hands went cold. There was no warning. No pending status. No explanation attached. Just confirmation that the transfer was complete and irreversible. I checked the destination account. I recognized the last 4 digits. My father's. I sat there staring at my phone while the office noise faded into something distant and muffled. Conversations passed me by. Someone laughed down the hall. None of it felt connected to what I was holding in my hand. I told myself there had to be a reason. A correction. A rebalancing. Something temporary, just like they'd said. But temporary things don't empty accounts. I called my mother first. It rang longer than usual. "Oh, hi," she said when she picked up, her voice light. "Is everything okay?" "There was a transfer," I said. "From the account." A pause. Not long. Just long enough. "Yes," she said. "That's part of the formality." My grip tightened around the phone. $330,000? She sighed, like I'd brought up something inconvenient. "You saw that already?" "Of course I saw it. It's just being moved," she said quickly. "For now." "For what?" I asked. "Estate planning," she replied. "We didn't want to overwhelm you with details." My father took the phone then. I could hear the shift before he spoke. "You're overreacting," he said. "The money isn't gone." "Then where is it?" I asked. "With us," he said plainly. "Where it's safer." "Safer? From what?" "From me." "You said nothing would change," I said. "And nothing has," he replied. "Not long term." That phrase again. Long term. It was doing a lot of work in that conversation. Stretching over gaps they didn't want to fill. "So I don't have access to it anymore," I said. "Not directly," my father said. "But it's still family money." Family money. I ended the call shortly after, my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. They acted like this was settled. Like the explanation itself was sufficient. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Emails unanswered. Tasks half finished. My mind kept circling the same realization. They hadn't asked. They hadn't explained. They hadn't warned me. They had simply waited until my signature made it possible. That night, I pulled out the folder again. Read every page slowly this time. Every clause. Every reference. Every word I'd skimmed because I trusted them. That was when I saw it clearly. The authorization wasn't temporary. It wasn't shared. It wasn't symbolic. I had signed away control. And the $330,000 transfer wasn't a mistake. It was the first move. One I was never meant to question until it was too late. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder spread open, pages weighted down with mugs and notebooks, reading the same paragraphs again and again until the words stopped blurring together and started forming a shape I didn't like. Authorization. Execution. Irrevocable. Those words weren't decorative. They weren't placeholders. They were levers. The document wasn't permission for my parents to help me manage money. It was permission for them to act instead of me. Fully. Immediately. Without further notice. I had given them unilateral control. What shocked me wasn't that the language was there. It was how carefully it had been hidden in plain sight, wrapped in reassurance and familiarity. The tone of the document was neutral, professional, boring by design. Nothing about it screamed danger unless you already knew what to look for. I hadn't. Because I trusted them. The next morning, I called the bank. After navigating menus and hold music, I finally reached a representative. I explained the situation calmly, sticking to facts. Shared account. Recent transfer. Authorization signed under family advice. She listened patiently, then asked me to hold. When she came back, her voice had shifted. More formal. More careful. Yes, she said. The transfer was executed according to the authorization on file. So I can reverse it? I asked. There was a pause. No, she replied. That authorization grants full control to the other account holders. You no longer have independent authority over those funds. The words landed heavily. I didn't understand that, I said. I'm sorry, she replied genuinely. But the document is clear. Clear. I thanked her and ended the call, staring at my phone long after the screen went dark. By lunchtime, my parents texted as if nothing had happened. Did you get home okay last night? We should have dinner soon. No mention of the transfer. No acknowledgement of the panic they'd triggered. Their normalcy felt deliberate, like they were trying to smooth over a crack before I could wedge my fingers into it. That afternoon, I did something I should have done before signing. I called a lawyer. Not a dramatic one. Not someone looking to escalate. Just someone to explain. I forwarded the documents and waited. When she called back, her first question wasn't about my parents. It was about timing. When did you sign this? She asked. 3 days before the transfer, I said. Another pause. And you weren't informed of the amount beforehand? No. She exhaled slowly. Then I need to be very honest with you. I braced myself. What you signed is valid, she said. But it's also unusually broad. It essentially allows your parents to consolidate assets under their control for estate purposes. So they can just take it? I asked. They can move it, she corrected. But that doesn't necessarily mean they can keep it permanently. That was the first crack of light. What does that depend on? I asked. Intent, she said. And structure. And whether this was part of a larger plan. A larger plan. That phrase stayed with me after the call ended. Because my parents had never been impulsive with money. Ever. They were planners. Long-term thinkers. The kind of people who talked about the right time more than actual outcomes. The transfer wasn't panic. It was preparation. That evening, I drove past their house without stopping. Lights were on. Curtains open. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't the money itself. It was the assumption. They assumed I wouldn't question them. That I'd accept reassurances instead of answers. That by the time I understood what had happened, the structure would already be locked. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to control the ending. What they hadn't realized yet was that I was done being the passive part of their plans. I didn't know exactly how I'd respond. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done reading the fine print. And neither was the law. Once I understood the transfer couldn't simply be reversed, the fear shifted into something sharper. Focus. Panic wastes time. Clarity buys it back. I stopped calling my parents. That wasn't a punishment. It was strategy. Every conversation we'd had so far followed the same pattern. Reassurance, deflection, vague promises about long-term. If I wanted answers, I needed them documented, not spoken over dinner. I emailed them instead. Carefully. Neutrally. I need clarification on the purpose of the $330,000 transfer, the intended duration, and how access will be restored. I reread the message 3 times before sending it. No accusation. No emotion. Just questions. My mother replied first. We're surprised by your tone. This was explained. It's part of our estate planning. Nothing has changed for you. Nothing had changed, except I no longer had access to nearly everything I'd saved. I responded once more, pressing slightly harder. Estate planning typically involves documentation outlining future distribution. Can you share where this is reflected? That question took longer to answer. My father finally replied hours later. We don't feel comfortable justifying every financial decision. This is for everyone's benefit. Everyone. That word appeared often when they wanted obedience without discussion. Everyone's benefit, but no shared visibility. Everyone's future, but only their control. I forwarded the exchange to the lawyer. She replied the next morning. This is helpful. Keep everything in writing. That became my rule. I requested copies of any trust documents, wills, or estate plans that referenced the transferred funds. I didn't demand. I requested. Calmly. Legally. The way people do when they're no longer playing the family role they were assigned. My parents didn't respond for 2 days. When they did, the tone had changed. My mother called me, voice tight. Why are you making this difficult? I'm asking for clarity, I said. We told you it's temporary. Then it should be easy to show me how. Silence. My father took the phone. You're acting like we stole from you, he said. I'm acting like someone whose money moved without explanation, I replied. He sighed. You're overthinking this. That sentence landed differently now. Overthinking had always been their way of dismissing discomfort without addressing it. I need documentation, I said. That's not overthinking. That's due diligence. The call ended shortly after. That night, I went through my financial history in detail. Every deposit. Every contribution. The account wasn't a gift from my parents. It was mine. Built slowly. Carefully. With years of restraint. Seeing it laid out that way did something important. It erased doubt. This wasn't family help gone wrong. This was a power move, executed legally, softened emotionally, and framed as inevitability. 2 days later, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a copy of a trust document. Dated years earlier. Amended recently. My name appeared in it. So did theirs. The language was careful, but the intent was clear. Consolidation first, distribution later, discretion reserved. I read it twice. Then a third time. And then I noticed something. A condition. Buried deep in the document, phrased conservatively, almost politely. A clause outlining what happened if beneficiaries were not informed, or if consent was obtained under misleading explanation. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was leverage. I felt something close to relief for the first time since the notification. My parents hadn't locked everything down as tightly as they thought. They had relied on trust, not challenge. And they had underestimated how carefully I would read once that trust was broken. I didn't confront them about the clause. Not yet. Because once you show someone the weakness in their structure, they rush to fix it. I needed time. Time to understand the document fully. Time to gather evidence. Time to stop being reactive and start being precise. They thought the transfer was the end of the conversation. It wasn't. It was the beginning of a negotiation they hadn't prepared for. And this time, I wouldn't be signing anything blindly. I didn't tell my parents what I'd found. Not the clause. Not the wording. Not the leverage. Instead, I did what I'd been trained to do my entire life. I waited. From the outside, it probably looked like I'd accepted their explanation. I stopped emailing. I stopped asking questions. I answered their texts politely and kept conversations shallow. When my mother asked if I was feeling better about everything, I said yes. That answer relieved them more than it should have. They invited me to dinner the following week, acting as if the tension had passed. My father poured wine. My mother cooked my favorite meal. They talked about plans, vacations, things they wanted to do once everything was settled. I listened. They spoke with the confidence of people who believed the structure was final, that the transfer had closed the door on resistance. That time would smooth whatever discomfort I'd felt. At one point, my mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand again. You know this is all for you someday, she said. We just need to manage it responsibly. Someday. That word was doing a lot of work. I nodded. I smiled. I said nothing. Because what they interpreted as acceptance was actually restraint. Behind the scenes, I was methodical. I requested historical statements from the bank. I documented the exact balance before the transfer. I saved copies of every email, every text, every vague reassurance they'd offered instead of specifics. I highlighted phrases like temporary, for your benefit, and nothing changes. Words matter when they're written down. I also met with the lawyer again. This time, we didn't talk about outrage or emotion. We talked about process. She explained how courts view consent, how misleading explanations weaken authorization, how family relationships complicate things, but don't excuse them. The key, she said, is whether they can prove you understood the consequence at the time you signed. They can't, I said. I agree, she replied. But we'll need patience. That didn't scare me. I had already learned patience the hard way. Weeks passed. Then months. My parents relaxed further. They stopped avoiding the topic entirely, mentioning the money casually now, as if it had always been theirs to discuss. We moved it into something safer, my father said once. We're protecting it from volatility, my mother added another time. They spoke as though they were caretakers, not controllers. And I let them. Because each passing week strengthened my position. The longer they held the money without transparency, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't emergency planning. It was consolidation without consent. I watched how they behaved around the money, how they referenced it, how they framed it as responsibility rather than ownership. They never once offered documentation without being asked. That omission mattered. One afternoon, my father casually mentioned a home renovation they were considering. With the transfer, we finally have flexibility, he said. I kept my expression neutral. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. The money wasn't sitting untouched. It wasn't isolated. It wasn't purely administrative. It was being absorbed. That night, I updated my notes and sent one final email to my lawyer. I think they're treating the funds as theirs. Her reply came quickly. That changes things. It did. Because estate planning protects intent. But misuse exposes it. The waiting I'd been doing wasn't passive. It was documentation. It was restraint. It was letting them believe their reassurance had worked, while they revealed how they truly saw the money. They thought my silence meant surrender. In reality, it was the strongest evidence I could gather. And once that evidence was complete, the conversation would no longer be informal. It would be legal. The letter didn't come from me. That was important. It came from my lawyer, printed on clean white paper, addressed formally, unemotional, and precise. No accusations. No threats. Just questions framed in language that demanded answers. When my parents received it, they called within the hour. My mother's voice shook. Why would you do this to us? To us, not to me. That distinction mattered. I asked for documentation, I said calmly. This is the next step. My father took the phone quickly, irritation replacing concern. This is unnecessary, he said. We're your parents. That's why this should be clear, I replied. Silence followed. Not the dismissive kind. The calculating kind. The letter requested a full accounting of the transferred funds, the legal basis for consolidation, and written clarification of when and how control would be returned. It also referenced the clause I'd found, carefully, indirectly, without revealing how much I understood. That clause unsettled them. They didn't admit it outright, but I could hear it in the shift of their language. Gone were the reassurances. Gone was just a formality. Now they spoke about misunderstandings, intentions, timing. We thought you understood, my mother said. I didn't, I replied. And that's the point. They asked for time to respond. The lawyer granted it. What followed was a strange reversal. The people who once controlled the conversation now treaded carefully, measuring every word. Emails arrived instead of calls. Attachments replaced anecdotes. The accounting they provided was incomplete. Dates missing. Transfers aggregated. Explanations vague. My lawyer flagged it immediately. "This isn't clean," she said. "And they know it." The next document they sent was worse. A revised explanation, attempting to reframe the transfer as protective rather than consolidating. It contradicted earlier statements. It referenced conversations that hadn't happened. Inconsistencies are loud in legal language. I didn't confront them directly. I let my lawyer respond. Each reply narrowed the options. Each question exposed another assumption they'd made, that I would back down, that emotional pressure would override process, that family ties would blur lines the law keeps sharp. It didn't. 2 weeks later, my parents asked to meet in person. Neutral ground. Coffee shop. Public. My father arrived tense. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. "We never meant to hurt you," she said immediately. "I believe that," I replied. "But intent doesn't erase impact." My father leaned forward. "We were trying to protect you." "From what?" I asked. He hesitated. "That's what the documents are supposed to explain," I continued. "They don't." The conversation stalled there, circling familiar ground. Responsibility. Trust. Sacrifice. All the words families use when they don't want to discuss control. When it became clear we weren't going to agree verbally, I stood. "My lawyer will be in touch," I said. My mother reached for my arm. "Please don't take this any further." I looked at her, really looked. "You already did," I said gently. That night, my lawyer called. "They're vulnerable," she said. "The way this was executed, combined with their own statements, puts them at risk." "What happens next?" I asked. "We escalate," she replied. "Formally." The filing wasn't dramatic. No courtroom scenes. No raised voices. Just paperwork submitted, timelines established, obligations triggered. And then something unexpected happened. The bank froze the funds. Not permanently. Temporarily. Pending clarification. The $330,000 stopped moving. That freeze changed the power dynamic instantly. My parents panicked. Calls. Messages. Pleas. But panic doesn't undo documentation. And for the first time since I'd signed that paper, the silence wasn't mine to hold. It belonged to them. And they didn't know what to do with it. The freeze changed everything, but not in the way I expected. I thought it would bring relief. Vindication. Some sense that I'd regained control. Instead, it brought clarity. When the money stopped moving, the truth finally surfaced. Not about finances, but about my parents. They stopped framing the situation as a misunderstanding and started treating it like a crisis. My mother called repeatedly, leaving messages that swung between apology and alarm. My father's texts grew shorter, more urgent, stripped of reassurance. "We need to resolve this quickly. This is getting out of hand. You're putting us in a difficult position." Not "you're in a difficult position." We were. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The moment the bank intervened, the narrative changed. This was no longer about protecting me. It was about regaining control. My lawyer advised distance. "Let the process work," she said. "Every word they send now matters." So I stopped responding entirely. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to smooth things over. I didn't explain myself. I let the silence sit where reassurance used to live. And in that silence, my parents revealed more than they ever had in conversation. They sent documents piecemeal, each one attempting to justify the transfer retroactively. A letter from their accountant. Notes referencing vague advice. None of it aligned cleanly with the authorization I'd signed or the explanations they'd given afterward. Inconsistency is a quiet confession. The bank requested clarification directly from them. Written statements, timelines, proof that the transfer was executed with informed consent. They struggled. Not because they were careless people, but because they had relied too heavily on assumption. Assumed I wouldn't question. Assumed family loyalty would outweigh scrutiny. Assumed process would bend around intent. It doesn't. A week later, my lawyer forwarded me an internal note from the bank. It was brief, unemotional, decisive. Pending resolution, funds may be returned to original account holder. Original account holder. Those words landed differently than any apology could have. When my parents finally requested another meeting, it felt different from the last. Less defensive. More cautious. They chose a lawyer's office this time, not a coffee shop. Neutral ground with witnesses. My father spoke first. "We underestimated how this would affect you," he said carefully. That wasn't an apology. It was an admission of miscalculation. My mother followed, voice trembling. "We thought we were helping. We didn't think you'd see it this way." I met their eyes, one at a time. "I didn't see it this way," I said. "Until the money moved." Silence followed. Their lawyer cleared his throat and spoke in generalities about family intentions and administrative oversight. My lawyer countered with specifics. Dates. Language. Statements. Facts don't raise their voices. By the end of the meeting, something had shifted again. Not resolution. Reality. The trust they'd leaned on as justification no longer protected them. The authorization they'd relied on now worked against them. The freeze forced a choice: correct the imbalance voluntarily or let it be corrected externally. That night, my father called me alone. "We never meant to take from you," he said quietly. "I know," I replied. "But you didn't mean to give it back either." He didn't answer. The next morning, the bank notified us of a pending action. Conditional. Provisional. But unmistakable. The transfer was being reviewed for reversal. Not because I demanded it. Because the structure required it. For years, my parents had believed they were guiding the outcome. That they could shape events gently, without confrontation. What they hadn't accounted for was what happens when the person being guided finally stops moving. The story had flipped. And this time, I wasn't reacting. I was watching. The way they once had. Patiently. Precisely. Waiting for the system they trusted to speak for itself. The notice arrived without drama. No apology, no explanation, just a bank message stating that pending review, funds would be restored to the original account holder within 5 business days. I read it twice, then set the phone down and waited for my breath to return. My parents called immediately. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because the moment wasn't for conversation. It was for proof. When the money moves, intent stops arguing. 5 days stretched longer than I expected. Each morning I checked the account, half expecting another reversal, another complication. Instead, the balance stayed frozen, a neutral pause that felt earned. The waiting was different this time. It wasn't obedience. It was composure. On the 5th afternoon, the notification came. Transfer completed. The same amount. The same commas. Back where it started. I felt no rush of triumph, only a steady quiet, like a room after furniture is set correctly. My lawyer called to confirm. "This doesn't end everything," she said. "But it resets the position." Reset was enough. We met once more, all of us, with attorneys present. My parents signed an acknowledgement clarifying limits, timelines, and consent requirements. The trust remained, but its teeth were dulled. Authority was shared again, defined, documented. No more formalities masquerading as favors. My mother cried softly while she signed. My father stared at the table, jaw tight, older than I'd ever seen him. I didn't reach across the table. Comfort would have blurred the lesson, and the lesson mattered. Afterward, we stood in the lobby unsure of how to part. My father finally spoke. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. "You were protecting control," I replied gently. He nodded, as if that distinction had finally found a place to land. Life resumed without spectacle. I didn't upgrade anything. I didn't announce victories. I rebuilt habits that had been interrupted and kept the rest unchanged. Stability, I learned, is the loudest proof when people expect celebration. Friends asked what happened. I told them the truth, briefly. It was resolved. They filled the silence with their own conclusions. I let them. At night, I thought about the phrase that started it all. Just a formality. I understood now why it worked for so long. Formalities borrow trust. They move quickly because people don't expect them to carry weight. But weight shows itself when something tries to leave. The money came back differently. Not because the numbers changed, but because I had. I read slower. I asked earlier. I kept records. I stopped translating reassurance into consent. The hardest part wasn't confronting my parents. It was accepting that love and control can share a face, and that boundaries don't mean betrayal. They mean clarity. When the accounts settled, I didn't feel finished. I felt ready. Ready to choose conversations over assumptions, documents over promises, and patience over panic. One act remained. Not about money, or law, or power. About what it takes to trust again, and how that trust would look now that it had limits. I promised myself one change going forward. Never confuse urgency with importance. If someone rushes me, I slow down. If they minimize details, I demand them. Trust now requires symmetry, not sentiment. My parents and I will rebuild carefully, if at all, with boundaries written and honored. The transfer taught me this. Clarity is kinder than comfort, and consent matters most when love insists otherwise. That lesson will guide every signature, conversation, and decision I make from here on, with patience, clarity, and courage. The money coming back wasn't the end of the story. It was the punctuation. What followed was quieter, harder to explain, and far more permanent. Once the paperwork was signed and the lawyers stepped away, my parents and I were left with something no document could organize. What trust looked like now. We didn't talk much at first. Not out of anger, but caution. Every conversation carried the weight of what had happened, and none of us wanted to say the wrong thing and reopen it. Distance settled between us, not hostile, just deliberate. I used that time to reflect on what I'd learned. The phrase "just a formality" wasn't a lie in their minds. It was a shortcut. A way to avoid discomfort, conflict, and explanation. They believed intention outweighed transparency, and that love excused urgency. But urgency is often the loudest sign that someone doesn't want questions. I saw my parents differently now. Not as villains, but as people who had confused protection with possession. Who believed they knew best long after that belief should have been examined. That realization didn't erase the hurt, but it gave it shape. We met again months later, this time without lawyers. Coffee. Neutral ground. No agenda. My mother spoke first. "I didn't think you'd ever challenge us," she admitted. "I didn't think I'd need to," I replied. That exchange said more than an apology ever could. My father nodded slowly. "I thought keeping control meant keeping you safe. And letting go would have meant trusting me," I said. He didn't argue. Trust, I realized, isn't restored by returning money. It's restored by changing behavior. And that takes time. I adjusted my life in ways no one could see. Separate accounts. Independent advisors. Clear boundaries communicated early, without apology. When someone says, "It's nothing," I ask them to show me why. When someone says, "Hurry," I stop. Those changes didn't make me suspicious. They made me grounded. People still ask how I handled it so calmly. They expect anger, confrontation, a dramatic ending. What they don't understand is that the calm came from clarity. Once I understood what had happened, I didn't need to fight emotionally. The structure did the work for me. That was the real inheritance. Not the $330,000. But the understanding that trust without information isn't trust at all. It's expectation. My parents and I are rebuilding slowly. With boundaries spoken aloud. With documents read together. With no more assumptions disguised as kindness. We may never return to what we were before, but we've moved towards something more honest. I don't regret signing that paper. If I hadn't, I might never have seen the dynamic clearly. I might have carried blind trust into future decisions where the cost would have been higher, the stakes more personal. The formality didn't take my money. It took my innocence. And in return, it gave me discernment. I no longer confuse reassurance with safety, or love with compliance. I understand now that the most dangerous words in any relationship are the ones meant to stop you from asking questions. Just sign. Don't worry. It's nothing. Those words cost me time, certainty, and peace. But they also taught me how to protect all three going forward. If there's one thing I know now, it's this. When something is truly a formality, it can survive scrutiny. When it can't, the problem isn't your hesitation. It's their urgency. And I will never sign under urgency again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.